The sky was gray that morning, heavy with clouds that looked like they were mourning too. A soft drizzle touched the marble graves as a long line of black cars rolled into the cemetery. People stepped out of them slowly. Men in black suits, women in long coats, reporters holding cameras, and security guards trying to keep order. It wasn't just any funeral. It was the funeral of Margaret Hale, one of the richest and most powerful women in the country. Everyone knew her name. Margaret had built an empire of companies and charities. She donated to hospitals, schools, and shelters. Many called her the angel of the city. Now, as her body lay in a silver coffin covered in white lilies, people whispered about how strange it felt to lose someone who had given so much. Near the front stood her son, Daniel Hale, a tall man in his early 30s dressed in a perfectly fitted black suit. His face looked calm, but his eyes told another story. He wasn't just sad. He looked lost, as if a piece of his world had been taken away forever. Around him stood politicians, business partners, and celebrities. Cameras clicked quietly, capturing every moment of grief. The priest began to speak, his voice soft but clear. "We gather today to honor a woman who touched millions of lives." His words floated in the air, mixing with the sound of raindrops on umbrellas. Everyone bowed their heads, pretending to pray, but many were thinking about how Margaret's death might change the future. Her businesses, her charities, her fortune. Even in death, she was at the center of power. At the far edge of the crowd, behind a row of expensive cars, stood a man who didn't belong there. His clothes were old and torn, his shoes muddy, and his hands rough from years of hard living. His name was Marcus Lee. Most people would have ignored him or asked security to make him leave, but Marcus kept his eyes fixed on the coffin. He wasn't there for money, fame, or pity. He was there because something inside him told him that this wasn't right. He watched as the priest continued the final words, and the workers prepared to lower the coffin into the ground. The wind picked up, making the flowers tremble. Marcus felt his heart beating fast like a drum. He didn't know why, but he couldn't shake off the feeling that Margaret Hale, the woman everyone believed was dead, wasn't gone. He had seen something before the funeral that no one else had noticed. Marcus remembered the first time he met Margaret years ago. Back then, he was just another face living on the streets. One cold winter evening, he had found shelter near the back of one of her charity centers. Instead of turning him away, Margaret had given him warm soup, a blanket, and a chance to work as a janitor for a few weeks. She spoke to him kindly, not like most people who looked down on him. "Everyone deserves a second chance," she told him. He never forgot those words. Since then, Marcus had always followed news about her. He respected her deeply, so when he heard about her sudden death, something inside him broke. But when he saw her photo from the hospital, something seemed strange. Her skin tone, her eyes, the position of her hands. It reminded him of something he had once seen when working at a clinic. A rare medical condition where people looked dead but were still alive, trapped in a deep coma. He couldn't explain it to anyone because no one would believe him. A homeless man with no medical training, claiming a billionaire wasn't really dead? People would laugh or call him crazy. Still, here he was, standing in the rain, watching as they prepared to bury the woman who had once shown him kindness. His stomach twisted with fear. What if he was wrong? What if he interrupted the funeral and made a fool of himself? But what if he was right, and she was alive, crying silently for help inside that coffin? The sound of thunder rumbled in the distance. The priest closed his book. "May she rest in peace," he said solemnly. Daniel stepped forward with trembling hands to throw the first handful of dirt over the coffin. The cameras zoomed in. The crowd whispered again. Marcus took a deep breath. His hands shook. He could feel his heart racing faster now. Every voice in his head told him to stay quiet, to walk away, to let it go. But one voice, the voice of the woman who once told him that everyone deserves a second chance, kept echoing louder. He gripped the rusty fence beside him, his eyes locked on the coffin. The world seemed to blur. He thought of the cold nights he'd spent on the streets, the people who ignored him, the way society never listened to someone like him. But Margaret had listened once. Maybe it was time to repay that kindness no matter the cost. As the workers moved to lower the coffin completely, Marcus stepped forward. His feet splashed through the puddles, drawing shocked looks from the people nearby. Security guards turned immediately. Daniel stared at him in confusion. The priest froze mid-prayer. Marcus opened his mouth to speak, his voice trembling but strong enough to break the silence of the storm. "She's not dead," he shouted. The crowd gasped. Cameras flashed. The guards rushed toward him. But Marcus didn't move. He stood there, soaked in rain, his eyes full of desperation and truth. In that moment, everything changed. The entire crowd froze when Marcus shouted those words. For a moment, even the rain seemed to pause. The sound of thunder faded, replaced by murmurs of confusion and disbelief. Cameras turned toward the thin, soaked man standing near the coffin. Reporters whispered to each other. Who was he? Why was a homeless man interrupting the funeral of one of the richest women in the country? Two security guards rushed forward and grabbed Marcus by the arms. His wet jacket tore slightly as he struggled to speak again. "Listen to me," he cried out. "She's not dead. You're burying her alive." The priest looked uncomfortable. Daniel Hale, still standing beside his mother's coffin, frowned deeply. His voice was calm but sharp. "Who are you? What is this nonsense?" Marcus's chest heaved as he tried to catch his breath. "Please, I'd just check her. I know it sounds crazy, but she's alive." The guards began to drag him away, but his voice cut through the murmuring crowd again. "She helped me once. Years ago, she gave me work. She spoke to me. I know her condition. She suffers from something called deep paralysis. Her heart slows down. Her body freezes, but she's not gone." The guests gasped. Some whispered that he was mad. Others said it was just a publicity stunt. The rain grew heavier, soaking everyone. But Marcus didn't stop shouting. He kept trying to make eye contact with Daniel. "Please, sir, you're her son. You know her. Would she want you to ignore someone crying out for her life?" Daniel clenched his jaw. He signaled the guards to stop for a moment. The cameras were still rolling, broadcasting the entire scene live. He didn't want to look heartless on national television. He walked closer, studying Marcus carefully. The man smelled of rain and street dust. His eyes were red, but full of something Daniel hadn't seen in weeks. Hope. "What's your name?" Daniel asked quietly. "Marcus. Marcus Lee," he replied, shivering. "I worked for your mother years ago, at one of her shelters. She talked to me when no one else would." Daniel's expression softened just a little, but his tone stayed skeptical. "You think my mother is alive, Mr. Lee?" "I don't think," Marcus said, shaking his head. "I know." The crowd started whispering louder now. Some guests were annoyed that the funeral had turned into chaos. Others looked frightened. The priest tried to calm everyone, saying gently, "Perhaps we should continue this later, Mr. Hale." But Daniel raised his hand, signaling silence. He couldn't ignore the strange pull in his chest, a tiny flicker of doubt that Marcus's words had awakened. Marcus looked desperate now. "I saw her photo from the hospital. Her lips weren't pale enough for death. There was color, warmth. It happens when the body slows down, but the person is still inside, trapped. It happened to a woman at the clinic I worked in once. Everyone thought she was dead, until she woke up." His voice cracked with emotion. "Please, I beg you. If I'm wrong, I'll walk away and never speak again, but if I'm right, you'll be burying your own mother alive." The wind howled across the graveyard, bending the umbrellas and making the flowers scatter. Daniel looked down at the coffin, that shining silver box that held his mother's body. He remembered holding her hand in the hospital, cold but soft. The doctors had said there was no pulse, no brain activity. He had believed them. Everyone had. But now, looking into Marcus's trembling eyes, something inside him whispered a question he didn't want to hear. What if? Before Daniel could speak again, one of the guests, a young nurse named Clara, who had worked briefly in Margaret Hale's medical wing, stepped forward. "Sir," she said nervously, "what he's saying, it's not impossible. There are rare cases where the body shuts down completely. I remember Mrs. Hale's last checkup. She had episodes of catalepsy. She could freeze for hours. Maybe he's right." Everyone turned toward her in shock. The priest clutched his book tighter. A reporter's camera flashed. Daniel's breath caught. He looked at Clara, then at Marcus. Two strangers, one poor, one young. both standing in the rain, asking him to believe the impossible. The security guards looked at Daniel, waiting for instructions. The rain poured harder now, soaking through everyone's clothes. Daniel rubbed his forehead, torn between logic and emotion. Finally, he muttered, "Fine. Open it." A gasp went through the crowd. Marcus's heart pounded. The workers hesitated, unsure if they were even allowed. Daniel spoke louder this time. "I said open it." The men moved quickly, unlocking the coffin lid. Everyone leaned forward, holding their breath. Marcus closed, his eyes praying silently that he wasn't wrong, that his instincts were right, that the woman who once showed him kindness would be saved. As the lid slowly lifted, a soft light from the cloudy sky fell across Margaret Hale's face. She looked peaceful, her hands folded perfectly. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, Clara leaned closer, her eyes wide. "Wait," she whispered. "Her fingers, they moved." The crowd gasped. Daniel stumbled backward, staring. Marcus stepped closer, tears filling his eyes. "I told you," he whispered. "She's not dead." The cemetery erupted into chaos. Cries, shouts, flashing cameras, and the sound of paramedics being called. But amid the confusion, Marcus stood still, his heart filled with both relief and disbelief. The woman who had once saved him had just been saved by him, and as the sirens grew louder in the distance, he realized something deep. Sometimes the ones society ignores are the only ones who truly see. Rain poured harder now, turning the cemetery into a sea of umbrellas and whispers. The silver coffin stood open under the gray sky. The flowers scattered across the wet ground, their colors mixing with the dirt. No one moved for a long moment. The world felt frozen, as if time itself was holding its breath. Marcus stood there, soaked from head to toe, his heart racing. He couldn't believe what he had just seen. Margaret Hale's fingers, and they had moved. It wasn't his imagination. It wasn't madness. There was life in her still. Clara, the young nurse, pressed her hand against Margaret's wrist again, searching desperately for a pulse. Her lips trembled. "There, it's faint," she whispered, her eyes wide. "But it's there." Gasps spread through the crowd. Daniel Hale's face turned pale. He stumbled back, shaking his head in disbelief. "That can't be possible," he murmured. The doctor said. His voice trailed off. Marcus took a step closer, his voice shaking but steady. "I told you," he said softly. "She's not dead." For a few seconds, no one knew what to do. The priest crossed himself, whispering a prayer. Reporters scrambled to capture the moment, their cameras flashing wildly. The guards, who moments ago were ready to drag Marcus away, now looked unsure, even frightened. Daniel fell to his knees beside the coffin, staring at his mother's still face. "Mom," he whispered. "Can you hear me?" The only sound was the rain and the distant rumble of thunder. Then faintly her lips parted. "Barely, but enough. She's breathing." Clara cried out. Chaos broke loose. Guests screamed. Some fainted. Others ran for cover. The funeral that had started as a solemn event had turned into a miracle before their eyes. Marcus stepped back, feeling dizzy. It was too much, too unreal. He had come here as a nobody, a homeless man with nothing left to lose, and somehow he had stopped a billionaire's burial. The same woman who once gave him hope was now alive because he had believed in her. Within minutes, paramedics rushed into the cemetery, carrying medical bags and stretchers. The guards quickly cleared the way. Daniel shouted orders, trying to stay in control. "Get her to the hospital, now!" The medics lifted Margaret's body gently, wrapping her in warm blankets. One of them checked her vitals and looked at Daniel with disbelief. "She's alive," the medic confirmed. Weak but alive. A cry of relief escaped Daniel's lips. His knees gave out and he covered his face with his hands. Clara helped steady him, tears streaming down her own cheeks. But amid the chaos, Marcus stood quietly in the rain, watching everything unfold. No one thanked him. No one even noticed him anymore. Everyone was focused on Margaret, the woman who had come back from the dead. And Marcus was fine with that. For the first time in years, he felt peace in his heart. As the ambulance doors closed and the sirens wailed, Daniel finally turned to look for Marcus. But he was gone. The man who had saved his mother's life had disappeared into the rain like a shadow. Reporters began shouting questions. How did this happen? Who was that man? Was it a miracle? Daniel ignored them all. His mind was spinning. He didn't even know Marcus's last name or where he came from. All he knew was that if not for that stranger, his mother would have been buried alive. Hours later, the story broke across every news channel. Homeless man stops billionaire's burial, saves her life. Videos of the chaotic scene flooded social media. Millions of people watched Marcus shouting, "She's not dead," over and over. Some called him a hero. Others said it was luck. Some even accused him of faking the whole thing. But Marcus didn't care about any of that. He was sitting quietly in a small alley downtown, wrapped in an old blanket, watching the rain slide down the walls. His clothes were still damp, but his soul felt lighter than it had in years. He thought of Margaret lying in the hospital now, surrounded by doctors and family. He knew she would survive. She was a fighter. She had always been. And he smiled faintly, whispering to himself, "I told them." Back at the hospital, Daniel sat beside his mother's bed, holding her hand as the machines beeped softly. She was weak but breathing steadily. He looked at her peaceful face and felt a tear roll down his cheek. "Someone saved you today," he said quietly. "Someone who didn't even have a home." Margaret's eyes fluttered slightly, and for a brief moment Daniel thought he saw the faintest smile. Outside, reporters waited, eager for answers. Inside, Daniel's heart was full of questions about life, faith, and the mysterious man who had appeared like an angel in rags. And somewhere out there, Marcus walked alone through the dark streets, invisible once again to the world that had ignored him. But this time he didn't feel invisible at all. He had done something that no one else could. He had seen what others couldn't, that life still flickered inside a body everyone thought was gone. As he reached the edge of the city, the rain began to slow and the first bit of sunlight broke through the clouds. Marcus stopped and looked up, letting the light touch his face. For the first time in years, he felt warmth, not just from the sun, but from something deeper. He smiled to himself and whispered, "She's not dead." And with those words, he kept walking, a nameless hero, leaving behind a story the world would never forget. The next morning, the sun rose gently over the city, washing away the storm that had shaken everyone the night before. Newspapers screamed headlines like, "Homeless man saves billionaire from burial alive," and "Miracle at the cemetery." Everywhere, people were talking about it, in coffee shops, on TV, even in the crowded buses. But for those closest to Margaret Hale, the miracle was more than just a story. It was personal. Inside the private hospital room, Margaret lay asleep, her face pale but peaceful. Machines beeped softly beside her, measuring each slow heartbeat, proof of life. Daniel sat quietly at her bedside, his eyes tired from a sleepless night. He kept replaying the moment in his head, the shouting, the chaos, the unbelievable truth. A homeless man had saved his mother. A stranger had seen what no doctor, no expert had noticed. Daniel's phone buzzed. Another call from a journalist. He turned it off. He didn't want to talk to anyone, not until he found Marcus. That name had been echoing in his mind since the funeral. Marcus Lee, who was he? How did he know so much about his mother? Why had he risked everything to stop the burial? Daniel needed answers. He called his assistant and said firmly, "Find him. I don't care how. Just find Marcus Lee." Meanwhile, miles away, Marcus sat at a small diner, staring at a cup of coffee someone had kindly bought him. His old jacket hung loosely around his shoulders, still damp from the rain. He hadn't slept either. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Margaret's face, first lifeless, then breathing again. He didn't want attention or fame. He just wanted to know she was truly safe. But he couldn't walk into a hospital dressed like this. People would throw him out before he even reached the lobby. He sighed, looking out the window as the city moved on, busy, loud, unaware that a man who had saved a billionaire's life was sitting right there alone, with nothing but a cold cup of coffee and a heart full of memories. Back at the hospital, Daniel's assistant arrived with a file. "We found him," she said. Marcus Lee, age 52. Used to work as a janitor at Hale Industries about 10 years ago. Fired after the company restructured. No home since then. Daniel frowned. "He worked for us." "Yes, and there's something else," the assistant continued, handing him an old record. "Apparently your mother personally signed a letter recommending him for a social housing program. She even donated money for his recovery after an accident." Daniel stared at the document, feeling a wave of emotion. His mother had always been known for her kindness, but seeing her handwritten note about Marcus, he is a good man, trying to rebuild his life. Please help him. Hit him hard, he whispered to himself. She knew him. Later that afternoon, Daniel's car pulled up outside a rundown shelter on the east side of the city. The place smelled of rain and old walls, but there was warmth inside. People chatting, volunteers handing out food, a small radio playing softly. And sitting in a corner just as Daniel had imagined was Marcus. When Marcus saw Daniel, he froze, unsure whether to stand or stay seated. Daniel approached him slowly, not as a billionaire's son, but as a man filled with gratitude. "You're Marcus Lee," Daniel said quietly. Marcus nodded. "Yes, sir. I suppose you're looking for me." Daniel sat across from him. "You saved my mother's life." Marcus shook his head. "No, sir. I just spoke when others stayed quiet. That's all." There was a long silence between them. Daniel studied Marcus, the tired eyes, the rough hands, the quiet dignity. "You worked for my mother once," Daniel said. A faint smile crossed Marcus's face. "Yes, she was different from most people. She looked at me like I was human. When I lost everything, my job, my home, my family, she was the only one who cared. Gave me work cleaning the halls, gave me food, and once she told me something I'll never forget." Daniel leaned forward. "What did she say?" Marcus looked up, his voice soft. "She said, 'Marcus, it doesn't matter how far you fall. What matters is whether your heart stays kind.'" Daniel's throat tightened. He could almost hear his mother's voice saying those exact words. "She saw good in everyone," Marcus continued. "That's why when I saw her in that coffin, something inside me screamed that she wasn't gone. I couldn't let them bury her like that. Not her." For the first time in years, Daniel smiled. Not the polite smile of a businessman, but a genuine one. "You listened to your heart," he said. Marcus looked down, embarrassed. "Maybe, but no one would have believed me if it weren't for that nurse." "I believe you," Daniel said. "You did what none of us had the courage to do." The two men sat quietly, the weight of their shared experience filling the space between them. Then Daniel reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an envelope. "This isn't charity," he said. "It's gratitude. My mother would have wanted you to have a home again." Marcus hesitated, shaking his head. "I didn't do it for money, sir." "I know," Daniel said softly. "That's why you deserve it." Tears welled up in Marcus's eyes, but he quickly wiped them away. For years he had been invisible, ignored, forgotten. But now someone saw him again. Someone believed in him. Before Daniel left, he said one more thing. "When my mother wakes up, I'll tell her who saved her. She'll remember you." Marcus smiled faintly, whispering, "Tell her Marcus kept his promise." As Daniel walked out of the shelter, the late afternoon sun broke through the clouds, casting a golden light over the city. Inside, Marcus sat quietly, holding the warm coffee between his hands. For the first time in a long time, it didn't taste bitter. He had saved a life, and in doing so, he had found his own again. Days passed, and the world couldn't stop talking about Margaret Hale. News channels called it a miracle revival, while scientists debated how a woman declared dead by 3 doctors could suddenly breathe again. Some said it was luck. Others whispered it was fate. But for Daniel Hale, it was more than either. It was a wake-up call. Inside her hospital room, Margaret was slowly recovering. Her eyes opened and closed like the flicker of a candle. She couldn't speak yet, but her fingers twitched whenever Daniel spoke to her. Every small movement gave him hope. One morning, the chief doctor, Dr. Langford, entered with a stack of reports. "We've gone over everything again," he said. "It appears Mrs. Hale was in a deep cataleptic state, very rare, but it can mimic death completely. Her heart rate was near 0, her breathing undetectable. Even the machines didn't pick it up." Daniel looked at him, still in disbelief. "So she wasn't dead? You almost buried her alive." The doctor lowered his head. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hale, we relied on the data we had. But if that man hadn't spoken up, she would have been lost." Daniel leaned back in his chair. His mother's life, billions of dollars, decades of success, thousands of people who admired her, had all come down to one man no one cared about. Marcus Lee. He knew he had to find proof of what Marcus had said at the funeral, that he'd recognized her condition before anyone else. Something told Daniel there was more to this story. Later that afternoon, Daniel visited the nurse Clara, the same young woman who had stood beside Marcus that day in the rain. She was in her late 20s, bright-eyed and sincere. When she saw Daniel, she stood quickly. "Sir, how is she?" "She's waking up slowly," he replied. "Thanks to you and Marcus," Clara smiled faintly. "I just remembered what I'd seen once during training. But Marcus, he was the one who refused to give up." Daniel nodded. "Tell me something, Clara. When Marcus shouted that she wasn't dead, what made you believe him? Everyone else thought he was crazy." Clara hesitated, thinking back. "It wasn't what he said," she replied softly. "It was how he said it. His eyes, and there was truth in them. Desperation, yes, but also a kind of love. Not romantic, but human, like someone who owed her something." Daniel smiled. He did owe her. She saved him once. Clara's eyes widened. "I didn't know that." "She helped him years ago," Daniel explained. "Found him when he was on the streets. Gave him work. Wrote letters for him. My mother saw good in him when no one else did." Clara nodded slowly. Maybe that's why he saw life in her when no one else could. That sentence stuck with Daniel. Later that night, he went to see his mother again. The lights in her room were soft and warm. Machines hummed quietly. He sat beside her, holding her hand, whispering, "Mom, you saved a man once, and that man saved you back. Can you hear me?" Her fingers twitched again. For the first time, her lips moved ever so slightly, forming one word. "Marcus." Daniel froze. He leaned closer. "Mom, did you say Marcus?" Her lips trembled again, a faint sound escaping. "Marcus." Tears filled Daniel's eyes. There it was, the proof. The connection was real, stronger than anyone could explain. Somehow, even in the darkness between life and death, she remembered him. The next morning, Daniel held a press conference, not to brag, but to clear the air. Dozens of reporters filled the room, cameras flashing. He stood at the podium, looking calm but determined. "My mother is alive today because one man refused to stay silent," he said. "A man with no money, no power, and no home, but with more courage than anyone I've ever met." He paused, scanning the room. "His name is Marcus Lee." He recognized something that our experts missed, a rare condition that mimics death. "Without him, my mother would not be here. He proved that humanity doesn't come from wealth or status, but from heart." The crowd erupted in applause. The story went viral again, but this time not about a miracle. It was about a man's faith in life itself. That evening, Daniel went to the shelter again. Marcus was there, quietly helping a volunteer serve soup. When he saw Daniel, he gave a small smile. "You didn't have to come all the way here again." Daniel shook his head. "I did, you were right about everything." Marcus laughed softly. "No, I was just lucky." Daniel pulled something from his coat pocket, a folded piece of paper. "No," he said. "You were right. My mother remembered your name." Marcus's smile faded. His eyes widened, filling with tears. She did?" "She said it herself," Daniel replied, smiling. "You saved her, Marcus. You saved my family." For the first time in a long time, Marcus couldn't speak. He simply nodded, wiping away tears he wasn't ashamed of anymore. Daniel placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "She wants to see you when she's strong enough. She told me once that good deeds always come back. And now I understand what she meant." Marcus looked down at his trembling hands. "I just did what anyone should do." Daniel smiled. "Not anyone, just someone brave enough to believe." The two men stood in silence for a moment, the sound of laughter and chatter from the shelter filling the air. Outside, the evening sky turned golden, warm, alive, full of light. And in that quiet moment, Marcus realized something beautiful, that sometimes the greatest proof of life isn't found in hospitals or machines. It's found in the heart that refuses to stop believing. The hospital room was silent except for the soft beeping of the heart monitor. Morning light filtered through the curtains, painting golden lines across the white walls. Margaret Hale had been asleep for days, her body slowly finding its way back from the edge between life and death. Daniel sat by her side as he had every morning, holding her hand gently, speaking to her even though she couldn't answer. He had learned something in these quiet days. Sometimes love wasn't about words. It was about being there. He read her old letters aloud, stories from when she started her company, notes she wrote to employees, even childhood memories she had shared with him long ago. He hoped her mind could hear them, that somewhere inside that deep silence she still remembered who she was. Then one morning, something changed. Daniel was reading aloud when he felt a faint squeeze against his palm. He froze. Slowly, he looked up. Her fingers twitched again. He leaned closer, heart pounding. "Mom?" he whispered. Margaret's eyelids fluttered. For a long second, nothing happened. Then her eyes opened, and soft, unfocused, but alive. Daniel's breath caught. "Mom, can you hear me?" Her lips parted, and a whisper escaped. "Daniel." He stood instantly, shouting for the nurse. "She's awake." Clara rushed in, followed by doctors. They checked her pulse, her breathing, her eyes. Everything was faint but steady. She was truly awake. Tears rolled down Daniel's cheeks as he leaned over her. "You're safe now, Mom. You're home." Margaret blinked slowly, her voice weak but full of wonder. I remember the light and a voice calling my name. It sounded so far away." Daniel smiled through his tears. "That voice wasn't from the light, Mom. It was Marcus. He saved you." Her brow furrowed softly. "Marcus?" Daniel nodded. "The man you helped years ago. He was at your funeral. He said you weren't dead. He stopped them before it was too late." For a moment she lay there in silence, her eyes filling with emotion. "He remembered," she whispered. "I always knew there was something special about that man." Daniel smiled gently. "He said the same about you." A few days later, when Margaret was strong enough, Daniel arranged for Marcus to visit her. He didn't tell Marcus at first. He wanted it to be a surprise. When the car came to the shelter, Marcus thought Daniel just needed help again. He hesitated at the hospital doors, nervous. He had never been inside a private hospital before, and the guards at the entrance made him feel out of place. But Daniel met him in the lobby, smiling warmly. "She's awake," Daniel said. "And she's waiting for you." Marcus's heart thudded in his chest. "She remembers me." "She does," Daniel said softly. "More than you think." They walked through the quiet hallway until they reached her room. Marcus stopped at the door, suddenly unsure of himself. He looked down at his old clothes, at his worn shoes. "I don't belong in a place like this," he muttered. Daniel smiled. "You belong wherever gratitude lives. Come in." Marcus stepped inside slowly. The room was filled with soft light, and Margaret was sitting up slightly, her eyes bright, though her body still weak. When she saw him, she gasped, not in shock, but in joy. "Marcus," she whispered. He froze, tears already burning his eyes. "Ma'am, you're alive," she smiled faintly. "Thanks to you." Marcus stepped closer, still unsure if this was real. I didn't do anything. I just saw what others didn't." "You did more than that," she said gently. "You believed when everyone else gave up. You gave me back my life." Tears slid down his face. "You gave me mine first." For a long moment they just looked at each other, a billionaire and a homeless man, bound not by money or class but by humanity. Two souls who had crossed paths when they both needed saving. Margaret reached out a trembling hand. "Come closer, Marcus." He knelt beside her bed and she placed her frail hand over his. "I remember the day I met you," she said softly. "You looked lost, but I saw light in your eyes. That same light brought me back." Marcus couldn't stop crying. "I thought I was crazy when I shouted that day. I thought they'd throw me in jail." She laughed weakly. "Sometimes the world calls brave people crazy." Daniel watched from the side, tears in his own eyes. He had seen many powerful moments in his life. Awards, deals, speeches, but none compared to this. This was real. Margaret looked at her son and said, "Daniel promised me something. Help people like Marcus. There are many out there with hearts like his, but no voice to be heard." Daniel nodded, voice shaking. "I promise, Mom." Margaret smiled faintly, looking back at Marcus. "And you, Marcus, and no more living in the shadows. You've earned your place in the light." Marcus lowered his head. "I don't need much, ma'am. Just to know you're all right," she smiled. "Then consider me your friend for life." The room filled with quiet emotion. Clara stood outside the doorway, wiping her eyes. Even the nurses couldn't help but smile. As Marcus left the hospital later that evening, the world outside looked different, brighter, softer. For the first time in years, he didn't feel invisible. He had walked through storms, through disbelief, through fear, and now through grace. He looked up at the fading sky and whispered, "She's not dead." But this time it wasn't a warning. It was a celebration of life, of faith, and of the miracle that happens when one heart chooses to believe in another. And somewhere behind those hospital windows, Margaret Hale whispered the same words, her voice soft but full of power. I'm not dead. I'm alive, and because someone believed. News of Margaret Hale's awakening spread faster than anyone could have imagined. Every channel, newspaper, and social media feed carried the same headline: Billionaire wakes from the dead, saved by a homeless man. The story had gone global. People were amazed, inspired, and even a little humbled. Around the world, strangers shared the story with disbelief. A wealthy woman who was almost buried alive, and a man with nothing who saved her. It sounded like something out of a movie, yet it was completely real. But for Margaret and Daniel, the real story wasn't about headlines or miracles. It was about second chances. Margaret's recovery was slow but steady. Each day she grew stronger, able to speak longer, to smile wider. Doctors called it a miracle of the human spirit, but she knew what it truly was, a miracle of faith. She often asked about Marcus. Where is he now? She would say each morning. Daniel smiled every time. He visits the shelter every evening, Mom. He doesn't want attention. He just wants to help people. That answer made her proud. Of course, she'd whisper. He's always been that kind of man. One sunny afternoon, about a month after her awakening, Margaret held a press conference. The room was full of reporters, flashing cameras, and curious faces. She sat in a wheelchair wearing a soft cream shawl, her face glowing with quiet strength. Daniel stood behind her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. Good afternoon, Margaret began, her voice gentle but steady. A few weeks ago, the world thought I was gone. I too believed that my journey had ended. But fate had other plans, plans that came through the most unexpected person. The room fell silent. Cameras zoomed in closer. A man named Marcus Lee, someone who has lived through more pain than most of us can imagine, saved my life, she continued. He saw life in me when no one else did. He believed when everyone else turned away. And because of that, I stand here today. Whispers filled the room. Some reporters wiped their eyes. Others simply listened, transfixed. Margaret smiled faintly. I have learned something powerful. Kindness never dies. The good we put into the world always finds its way back, even when we least expect it. Years ago, I helped Marcus when he was lost. I never thought that same man would one day save me. Daniel stepped forward. From today, he announced, we are launching the Second Chance Foundation, an organization dedicated to helping the homeless and those forgotten by society. It will provide jobs, homes, and healthcare, and it will be named in honor of the man who reminded us that humanity still exists, Marcus Lee. The crowd erupted into applause. Flashlights burst like fireworks. Margaret looked over to the side of the stage where Marcus stood quietly, nervous and humble, wearing a clean shirt Daniel had given him. She smiled warmly and beckoned him forward. The cameras followed him as he slowly approached, unsure what to do with so many eyes watching. Margaret reached out her hand. Come here, Marcus. He took her hand gently, bowing his head. Ma'am, I don't deserve all this, she laughed softly. Oh, but you do. You've given this world something money can't buy. Faith in goodness. The audience clapped louder. For the first time in his life, Marcus didn't feel small or invisible. He felt seen, truly seen. When the conference ended, people rushed to shake his hand, to take pictures, to thank him. He was overwhelmed but grateful. Daniel placed a hand on his shoulder and whispered, You changed everything, Marcus. Not just for us, but for thousands of others. In the following weeks, the foundation took shape. Homeless shelters were built, job programs launched, and food centers opened across the city. Marcus insisted on helping directly, sweeping floors, serving meals, talking to people who felt hopeless just as he once had. Everywhere he went, people recognized him. You're the man who saved that lady, children would say with wide eyes. Marcus would just smile and reply, No, I'm just a man who believed. At night, when the streets were quiet, Marcus often walked by the old cemetery, the same place where he had once shouted, She's not dead. The air was calm now, the trees still. He would stand there for a few minutes, remembering that day, the fear, the disbelief, and then the miracle. Sometimes Daniel joined him. They would stand side by side, silent, two men from different worlds united by something bigger than both, truth. One evening, Margaret herself visited the shelter, walking slowly with the help of a cane. When Marcus saw her, he smiled and said, "You shouldn't have come all this way, ma'am." She smiled back. "I had to see the place built from your courage." He looked around at the bustling kitchen, the laughter of children, the smell of warm food, and said quietly, "This isn't mine, ma'am." "It's ours." Margaret nodded, her eyes misty. "No, Marcus, it's yours. You reminded the world that one act of faith can awaken thousands." They stood together, watching as people lined up for dinner, no one rich, no one poor, just humans helping humans. For Marcus, life had come full circle. He had once been the man no one noticed. Now, he was the man who reminded the world to notice. And for Margaret, it wasn't her fortune or fame that mattered anymore. It was the second chance she had been given, and the man who made it possible. As she left the shelter that night, she turned back and smiled at Marcus. "You once said I wasn't dead," she said softly. "But my dear Marcus, neither were you." He looked up, eyes glistening, and smiled. "No, ma'am, not anymore." Outside, the city lights glowed like stars fallen to earth, proof that sometimes, even in darkness, humanity still shines the brightest. Years passed, but the story of Margaret Hale and Marcus Lee never faded. It became more than just a headline. It became a symbol of hope, a living reminder that one act of faith could change the world. The Second Chance Foundation grew beyond anything Margaret or Daniel could have imagined. What started as one building turned into hundreds across the country, shelters, schools, and medical centers. On every wall there was a small plaque that read, "Inspired by Marcus Lee, a man who saw life where others saw death." People came from everywhere to volunteer. CEOs stood beside former homeless men, children handed out meals, and families donated their time instead of money. It wasn't charity anymore, it was connection. Humanity had woken up. Margaret often visited the foundation's main center, even as her hair turned silver and her steps slowed. She no longer cared for luxury or fame. She found peace in simple things. The laughter of children, the smell of soup in the kitchen, the sound of people sharing stories. Every time she saw Marcus, she would smile and say, "You started all this," and every time, he would shake his head humbly. "No, ma'am, you did. You believed in me first." But they both knew the truth. Neither could have done it without the other. Their lives had become intertwined threads in the same beautiful fabric. One evening years later, Margaret sat on the porch of the foundation home, watching the sunset. The city was quieter now, the skyline painted in shades of gold. Marcus sat beside her, older too, his beard flecked with white. They didn't speak much anymore. They didn't need to. Silence had become their shared language, one filled with peace and gratitude. After a long pause, Margaret said softly, "Do you ever think about that day?" "The funeral?" Marcus smiled faintly. "Every night. I still hear the rain, the people shouting, the guards pulling me away, and then your hand moving. That moment changed everything." She nodded slowly. "You know, I think it wasn't luck, maybe. Life wanted to remind us both that we still had something to do." Marcus chuckled quietly. "Maybe. I never thought I'd live to see this. All these people, smiling, working, helping each other. It's like the world came back to life too." Margaret looked at him warmly. "That's your doing, Marcus. You made people believe again." He shook his head. "No, ma'am. You gave me something to believe in first." As the sun sank lower, the two sat in peaceful silence, the golden light wrapping around them like a blessing. A few months later, the world said goodbye to Margaret Hale for the second and final time, but this time it wasn't in sadness. It was in celebration. Her funeral was held in the garden of the foundation she had built with Marcus. Hundreds of people gathered, families she had helped, children who had grown up under her care, and workers who had once been lost souls like Marcus himself. Daniel stood at the podium, his voice steady but full of emotion. "My mother didn't just come back to life once," he said. "She gave life to thousands. And she did it because one man had the courage to believe in what others couldn't see." He turned toward Marcus, who stood quietly at the side. "Mom always said kindness never dies. You prove that." Marcus didn't speak. He just nodded, his eyes full of tears. When the ceremony ended, he walked to Margaret's resting place, a simple stone surrounded by flowers. He placed a single white lily on the grave and whispered, Rest easy, ma'am. You taught me how to live. After that day, Marcus continued her work. He became the face of the Second Chance Foundation, traveling to cities telling his story, not about miracles but about faith. He spoke to people in schools, prisons, and shelters, reminding them, "You're not invisible. You're not forgotten. You're not dead inside. You just need someone to see you." And people listened, because his words came from truth, not wealth. Years later, when Marcus himself passed away peacefully in his sleep, the world mourned a hero who never wanted fame. His ashes were laid beside Margaret's under the same tree where they had once talked about life, death, and second chances. Above them, a new plaque was placed. It read, "Here rest two souls who proved that compassion is the heartbeat of humanity." Visitors came from all over to see it, not to mourn, but to remember. Some came broken, others hopeful, and each person who left carried a spark of their story in their heart. Because She's Not Dead was no longer just about a woman saved from burial. It had become something much greater, a promise that as long as kindness exists, no one is ever truly lost, and somewhere beyond the sky, perhaps Margaret smiled at Marcus once more. Two souls reunited. Proud of the world they'd helped awaken, the world moved on, but their legacy lived forever, in every act of mercy, every hand that helped another, and every voice that whispered when all hope seemed gone, "She's not dead."